Before sunrise, Dayo Akinwale woke beneath the pressure of private responsibilities that could not be postponed. The streets of Lagos Island, Surulere, and Victoria Island were already stirring when the day's first difficult choice arrived. The object at the heart of the coming mystery, a voice recording, seemed ordinary then, carrying no warning of what it would soon reveal. Dayo Akinwale began the morning with a routine shaped by necessity, checking the little money available, answering an anxious call, and preparing to face Lagos Island, Surulere, and Victoria Island. Nothing suggested that a voice recording would matter. The object passed through ordinary hands while buses groaned outside and traders arranged their goods. Later, everyone would remember this quiet hour differently, but Dayo would remember the feeling of having no room for another problem. Before leaving home, Dayo Akinwale paused over a familiar photograph and nearly called someone for help. Pride stopped the call. That private hesitation mattered because it showed how long Dayo had survived by appearing stronger than circumstances allowed. The day would challenge that habit. Receiving help, Mama Uche often said, did not turn a responsible person into a burden. It simply admitted that no life was carried alone. The pressure of the morning followed Dayo Akinwale into the street. A familiar vendor offered credit, then pretended not to notice the embarrassment it caused. Dayo promised to return with payment and walked on. That small exchange established what was at risk long before wealth or influence entered the story. The fragile independence of someone who had survived by keeping promises, even when circumstances made each promise difficult. Dayo Akinwale met Ifeoma Nwosu in circumstances that made honest understanding almost impossible. One appeared powerless, while the other carried a hidden history. Their first exchange was cautious, but a moment of uncalculated decency interrupted the assumptions each had brought into the encounter. Their meeting did not resemble destiny. Ifeoma Nwosu was impatient, Dayo Akinwale was guarded, and both were carrying worries the other could not see. A minor misunderstanding nearly ended the encounter before it began. Then an immediate practical problem forced them to speak again. The second exchange was less polished and therefore more honest, revealing concern neither had intended to show. "You look as though you are deciding whether to trust me," Ifeoma Nwosu observed. Dayo Akinwale replied, "I am deciding whether your words agree with your behavior." The answer produced an uncomfortable smile. Trust between them began not as romance or loyalty, but as observation. Each would remember this exchange when later secrets forced them to ask whether affection had made their judgment clearer or merely more convenient. Dayo Akinwale noticed one contradiction in Ifeoma Nwosu's appearance or manner, but dismissed it as none of Dayo's business. The instinct was generous and dangerous. Respecting privacy did not require ignoring warning signs, yet suspicion had never come naturally. Their conversation ended with a simple agreement to meet again. Neither understood how much truth would have to be uncovered before that ordinary promise could be kept honestly. When bystanders chose convenience, Ifeoma Nwosu chose to act. Ifeoma protected a stranded widow and refused to exploit a driver she thinks is poor. The decision cost time, money, and social approval, yet no promise of reward influenced it. That was precisely why the moment mattered. People nearby watched Dayo Akinwale pay the cost of helping. One woman advised against it. A man laughed and said kindness did not settle rent. Dayo heard them and continued anyway. The choice involved no heroic speech. It was made through tired hands, counted notes, and the willingness to arrive late. That ordinariness made the sacrifice believable to Ifeoma Nwosu, who had grown suspicious of public displays of goodness. The person receiving the kindness tried to refuse, embarrassed by the attention. Dayo Akinwale made the assistance practical and brief. preserving dignity instead of creating a scene. Across the road, Ifeoma Nwosu noticed that no photograph was taken and no name requested. That absence of performance challenged beliefs, formed by years, among people who converted every generous act into reputation, influence, or debt. On the journey home, Dayo Akinwale calculated what the decision had cost and felt a brief sting of regret. Then the person who had been helped offered a blessing instead of repayment. The words were awkward but sincere. Dayo accepted them without pretending blessings paid bills. Morality in this story would never erase material hardship. It would reveal what people chose when hardship gave selfishness a convincing excuse. Vanessa Cole entered the story with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling the version of events other people heard. Vanessa quickly recognized that Dayo Akinwale could disturb an arrangement protected by fear, money, and silence. Vanessa Cole learned about the encounter through a phone call delivered in careful language. Instead of asking whether anyone was hurt, Vanessa asked who had witnessed it and what evidence remained. An assistant hesitated before answering. That hesitation was enough to reveal that obedience inside the household or company had begun to weaken, though nobody yet possessed the courage to say so openly. Vanessa Cole did not consider cruelty a personal trait. It was described as discipline, standards, or protection of the family name. That language allowed harm to travel through offices and households without anybody accepting ownership. An assistant later remembered how Vanessa ended the call. Handle it. Two harmless-sounding words became permission for people lower down to do what Vanessa preferred not to witness. An employee asked Vanessa Cole whether the order was lawful. The question produced a long stare. "Do you want to keep your position?" Vanessa replied. Nothing more needed to be said. Later, that employee wrote the exchange down. Fear prevented immediate resistance, but memory preserved the instruction. The account would matter when Vanessa claimed that cruel subordinates had acted without permission or knowledge from above. Mama Uche witnessed the aftermath and offered practical help rather than empty encouragement. Over a modest meal, Uche warned that powerful people often interpreted gentleness as permission. Dayo Akinwale answered that dignity did not require cruelty, only courage and evidence. Mama Uche served food in mismatched bowls and allowed Dayo Akinwale to talk without interruption. The account came out unevenly, with irritation covering fear. When Dayo finally stopped, Uche asked one question: if nothing is wrong, why are powerful people working so hard to make you doubt what you saw? The question followed Dayo long after the plates had been cleared. Mama Uche refused to predict a happy ending. Instead, Uche helped separate facts from fears on a piece of paper. The first column contained what Dayo Akinwale knew. The second held suspicions. The third listed questions that could be answered. This modest exercise slowed panic and prevented one weak assumption from damaging stronger evidence. It also returned a sense of direction when every problem seemed to arrive at once. Before Dayo Akinwale left, Mama Uche wrapped a little food for later and refused payment. The kindness was offered without making poverty a spectacle. "Eat before you make a serious decision," Uche said. It sounded almost humorous, yet hunger had already begun sharpening every insult and darkening every possibility. The meal did not solve the problem. It allowed Dayo to think as a person rather than react as a body in distress. The next encounter deepened the connection between Dayo Akinwale and Ifeoma Nwosu. They discussed family, work, and the private disappointments that shaped them. Neither revealed everything. The omitted truths created a quiet distance, even as genuine affection and respect began to grow. A later conversation between Dayo Akinwale and Ifeoma Nwosu wandered away from the crisis. They discussed childhood ambitions, embarrassing mistakes, and the relatives who had shaped them. Laughter arrived unexpectedly. It created warmth, but it also made the concealed truth more dangerous. Each time Ifeoma nearly confessed, another interruption offered relief. Dio mistook that hesitation for shyness instead of the burden of a secret. Their laughter ended when a voice recording was mentioned. Ifeoma Nwosu changed the subject too quickly, and Dio Akinwale noticed. Rather than press, Dio stored the moment among other inconsistencies. Human relationships rarely collapse because of one concealed fact. They weaken beneath the accumulated weight of pauses, half answers, and the growing suspicion that tenderness itself is being used to manage what another person is allowed to know. Ifeoma Nwosu almost revealed the secret when Dio Akinwale described an old loss. Sympathy pushed against fear, and the first words escaped before caution returned. Dio noticed the unfinished sentence. "What were you going to say?" The answer, "Nothing important," created the first deliberate crack between them. Small lies often survive because affection encourages patience, but each one teaches the listener to distrust the next moment of hesitation. A public humiliation tested the values everyone claimed to possess. Vanessa manipulated recordings to make Ifeoma look like a gold digger. Several witnesses looked away because intervention carried a cost. Dio Akinwale refused to purchase safety with a convenient lie. The humiliation happened where enough people could see it, and too few were willing to intervene. Vanessa Cole controlled the room by speaking first and loudly. Dio Akinwale was expected to lower both eyes and voice. Instead, Dio asked for the accusation to be repeated clearly. That calm request frightened Vanessa more than shouting would have done, because it turned abuse into a statement witnesses could remember. A younger witness lowered a phone after quietly recording part of the confrontation. The decision was risky but important. Without it, Vanessa Cole could later reduce the humiliation to a misunderstanding. Dio Akinwale did not know the evidence existed. That ignorance kept the response genuine. No theatrical tears, no rehearsed courage, only the controlled breathing of someone determined not to surrender dignity before a hostile crowd. When the crowd dispersed, one witness approached Dio Akinwale privately to apologize for remaining silent. Dio accepted the apology, but asked why support had waited until danger passed. The witness had no satisfying answer. This became a second lesson beneath the public conflict. Private sympathy could comfort the person offering it, yet only timely courage could interrupt harm while it was occurring. Alone afterward, Dio Akinwale questioned whether doing right was merely another luxury poor people could not afford. Mama Uche rejected that despair, reminding Dio that poverty could take comfort without being allowed to take character. Afterward, Dio Akinwale washed dust from tired feet and stared at the practical damage: lost wages, torn clothing, missed work, or food that could not be replaced. Anger would have been easier than uncertainty. Mama Uche arrived with no miracle, only transport money and the promise to return in the morning. The modest help kept despair from making the next decision. That night, sleep came in fragments. Dio Akinwale replayed every choice and found imaginary moments when silence might have preserved comfort. By dawn, those alternatives looked less attractive. Each required an innocent person to carry the blame. Exhaustion remained, but uncertainty had sharpened into purpose. Dio dressed carefully, not to impress anyone, but to meet the next accusation without looking defeated in advance. Mama Uche stayed through the evening and helped repair what could be repaired. They worked without discussing revenge. At last, Dio Akinwale asked whether dignity was worth so much trouble. Uche answered, "Dignity is not the trouble. The trouble belongs to people who believe yours is cheaper than theirs." The sentence did not remove pain. but it placed responsibility back where it belonged. Ifeoma Nwosu began investigating the contradictions surrounding a voice recording. A date, name, or damaged mark did not fit the accepted account. Each answer produced a more dangerous question, and somebody inside the circle of trust was monitoring the search. Ifeoma Nwosu examined a voice recording beneath better light. A scratch, date, name, or voice did not fit the accepted story. Rather than announce the discovery, Ifeoma photographed it and placed the copy somewhere outside the family's control. That precaution marked an important change. Ifeoma was no longer trying merely to understand the secret. Ifeoma was beginning to fear the people who had protected it. The clue inside a voice recording connected to a memory Ifeoma Nwosu had dismissed for years. An older relative had once begun the same story and been interrupted. Ifeoma now understood the interruption as deliberate. A telephone call to that relative produced silence, then tears. "I hoped this would stay buried," the voice admitted. Ifeoma answered, "Buried things do not disappear, they shape the ground above them." Ifeoma Nwosu checked the clue against an independent source and received an answer that made coincidence unlikely. The person on the telephone advised silence until formal proof existed. Ifeoma agreed, then sat with the discomfort of possessing information that affected Dayo Akinwale more deeply than anyone else. Keeping quiet for a few days might protect evidence. Keeping quiet indefinitely would repeat the original betrayal under a more respectable name. Vanessa Cole offered Dayo Akinwale a private bargain: money, security, or restored status in exchange for silence. The offer was described as generosity. Dayo recognized it as a price placed on truth and refused. Vanessa Cole arranged the private offer in a place designed to make refusal feel foolish. The amount mentioned could solve several immediate problems. Dayo Akinwale asked whether accepting it required signing anything. "Only your silence," Vanessa replied. Dayo pushed the envelope back across the table. The gesture looked small against polished furniture, yet it changed the balance of power, because fear had failed to produce obedience. Dayo Akinwale left the envelope unopened. Seeing that refusal, Vanessa Cole changed tactics and spoke about family obligations, reputation, and the danger of embarrassing respectable people. The appeal revealed that the money had never been generosity, it was insulation. Dayo stood and said, "If your respectability requires my silence, then what you are protecting is not respect." The meeting ended before Vanessa could recover control. The envelope remained on the table after Dayo Akinwale left. Vanessa Cole opened it, counted the untouched money, and smiled without amusement. Refusal changed Dayo from a manageable inconvenience into a genuine threat. People who wanted more could be bought. People who wanted truth required a different strategy. By nightfall, Vanessa had begun calling those who controlled work, housing, records, or reputation around Dayo. Rumors moved faster than evidence. Neighbors, colleagues, and relatives repeated a distorted version of events, until Dayo Akinwale became both spectacle and suspect. The isolation hurt more, because some accusations came from people who had once accepted help without hesitation. By evening, the rumor had acquired details that never happened. Strangers repeated them with confidence, while acquaintances avoided Dayo Akinwale in the market and at work. A person who had once borrowed money now claimed to have always suspected bad character. Dayo learned how quickly communities could turn uncertainty into entertainment when the accused person lacked the status to answer on equal terms. A false story thrives when it is more entertaining than the truth. Dayo Akinwale could not chase every whisper. Mama Uche advised answering only claims attached to real consequences. Together they corrected an employer, a landlord, and an official record, while allowing market gossip to exhaust itself. The discipline saved energy and denied Vanessa Cole the chaotic public argument that would have made both sides appear equally unreliable. Dayo Akinwale deleted social media applications for several days and concentrated on people whose decisions had real power. It was tempting to answer every insult, but defending a life in fragments before strangers would create endless contradictions. Mama Uche became the trusted second reader for messages. Together, they learned that restraint was not silence. It was choosing the place where truth could produce consequence instead of merely feeding another afternoon of gossip. Mama Uche located the first independent proof, a receipt, saved message, witness, or official record connected to a voice recording. It did not reveal the whole conspiracy, but it proved that the public story could not be true. Mama Uche returned carrying a plastic folder protected from rain. Inside was the first piece of evidence obtained without influence from Ifeoma Nwosu or Vanessa Cole. It had come from an overlooked everyday record and carried a date nobody could easily explain away. Dayo Akinwale read it twice. The proof did not solve the story, but it ended the cruel suggestion that the troubling memory had been imagined. The new evidence created a choice. Taking it directly to Ifeoma Nwosu might produce help, but it might also warn the person responsible. Dayo Akinwale chose an independent professional or elder with no family loyalty at stake. The decision slowed the process and protected it. For the first time, the truth existed somewhere that wealth, romance, and intimidation could not quietly retrieve and rewrite. The independent witness insisted on telling the story in person. Hands shook while the details emerged. Dayo Akinwale resisted the urge to hurry. Trauma had broken the memory into pieces, and pressure would not improve it. When the account was finally complete, one precise detail matched a voice recording. That agreement between people who had never met gave the evidence strength no family influence could honestly dismiss. Dayo Akinwale confronted Ifeoma Nwosu about the deception between them. Ifeoma tried to explain the fear behind it, but explanation sounded dangerously close to excuse. "You did not trust me with a choice," Dayo said. "You arranged my choices and called the result truth." When Dayo Akinwale confronted Ifeoma Nwosu, the room became painfully quiet. Ifeoma began with reasons, describing danger and fear. Dayo listened until the explanation circled back to self-protection. "You decided what I was allowed to know," Dayo said. "Then you watched my choices, as if I were the only person being tested." Ifeoma had no answer that did not sound like another defense. Ifeoma Nwosu apologized during the confrontation, but the word landed too early. Dayo Akinwale had not yet finished asking questions. "Please do not use sorry to close a door. I have only just opened," Dayo said. Ifeoma stopped speaking. The silence that followed was painful, yet it gave Dayo space to describe the injury in full, rather than accepting the smaller version the deceiver was prepared to regret. Ifeoma Nwosu asked for another chance to explain. Dayo Akinwale granted 10 minutes. Not because trust had returned, but because unanswered questions still mattered. The explanation revealed genuine fear alongside selfish control. Human motives were not tidy. A person could love and still manipulate, protect and still injure. Recognizing complexity did not require excusing harm. It allowed Dayo to judge the behavior accurately, instead of reducing everyone to a simple villain or savior. The relationship fractured. Dayo Akinwale left without accepting transport, money, or protection. For the first time, Ifeoma Nwosu understood that wealth could force a meeting while making reconciliation impossible. Dayo Akinwale left before emotion could be mistaken for agreement. Outside, evening traffic had thickened and rain threatened. Ifeoma Nwosu offered a car, money, and security. Each offer was refused. Walking away cost Dayo comfort, but restored control over the next step. For Ifeoma, the closed gate made one fact unavoidable. Affection could not cancel a deception simply because the deceiver feared losing love. At the roadside, Dayo Akinwale counted enough money for only part of the journey and began walking. The refusal of comfort was not romantic. It meant sore feet and a late return. Still, each step created distance from a room where every offer carried invisible conditions. Mama Uche eventually arrived in a battered vehicle and said nothing until Dayo was ready to speak. That restraint felt safer than rescue. The walk home passed places Dayo Akinwale knew well, but humiliation altered them. Familiar shopkeepers seemed to be watching. At a junction, Mama Uche found Dayo and offered silent company. They walked side by side until breathing became steady. Only then did Dayo speak. The first sentence was not about money or the secret. It was, "I hate that part of me still wants to believe, Ifeoma Nwosu." Vanessa Cole used the separation to escalate the scheme. Documents disappeared, witnesses were threatened, and a new accusation placed Dayo Akinwale at the center of wrongdoing. The trap depended on society believing the poorer person before examining the powerful one. The separation gave Vanessa Cole room to move. A document disappeared, a witness changed a statement, and an official suddenly remembered a rule that placed Dayo Akinwale at fault. The scheme was clever because each action looked administrative when viewed alone. Together they formed a trap. Vanessa depended on exhaustion, doing what threats had not, persuading Dayo that truth was too expensive to continue defending. The new accusation reached Dayo Akinwale through an official-looking letter. Its formality caused a moment of panic, but one date contradicted a saved message. Mama Uche spotted it. Together, they realized the scheme had been prepared quickly. Vanessa Cole possessed influence, not perfection. From then on, they looked for hurried details, copied signatures, reused envelopes, and instructions sent at hours when honest offices were closed. Vanessa Cole expected the official letter to end resistance. Instead, Dayo Akinwale visited the issuing office and asked to see the rules cited. A junior clerk discovered that the reference number belonged to an unrelated case. The clerk became nervous and tried to retrieve the letter. Dayo photographed it first. The scheme had gained authority by borrowing the appearance of procedure. Careful questions stripped that appearance away. Rather than run, Dayo Akinwale created a careful record. Dates were written down, messages copied, and witnesses approached without promises. Fear remained, but it stopped deciding the direction of each step. Dayo Akinwale bought a cheap notebook and began recording every detail: dates, times, names, telephone numbers, and exact words. Mama Uche made copies and stored them elsewhere. The exercise felt tedious until two entries revealed the same vehicle or signature appearing where it should not. Evidence began growing from patience rather than luck, and the people behind the scheme had not prepared for that kind of discipline. The notebook changed the quality of Dayo Akinwale's memory. Emotion no longer had to carry every fact. When an official asked the same question in 3 different ways, Dayo answered from the written record and avoided contradiction. Vanessa Cole had expected a frightened person telling a painful story. Instead, investigators encountered a careful witness whose account remained steady because it had been documented before anyone promised a reward. The notebook accompanied Dayo Akinwale everywhere. Entries recorded not only threats, but also uncertainties and mistakes. That honesty improved credibility later. Dayo did not claim perfect memory or knowledge, only a faithful account of what had been observed. Investigators often trusted the admitted gaps because they showed the witness was not inventing certainty merely to make the story stronger. Mama Uche gathered ordinary people who had suffered similar treatment. Their separate complaints formed a pattern that no single accusation could show. What had appeared to be personal misfortune became evidence of a system. Others came forward quietly. A cleaner waited behind the shop. A former employee sent a message after midnight. An elderly neighbor remembered a visitor everyone else had forgotten. None possessed the whole truth. Mama Uche laid their accounts side by side until a pattern appeared. What had been dismissed as Dayo Akinwale's private conflict now revealed years of similar harm directed at people with little power. Each witness feared a different consequence. One might lose employment, another housing, another family acceptance. Dayo Akinwale never demanded bravery without protection. Statements were copied, names withheld where lawful, and meetings arranged in public places. This care built trust. It also contrasted sharply with Vanessa Cole's method, which demanded loyalty while leaving subordinates exposed whenever harmful instructions became difficult to defend. The group of witnesses agreed that nobody would meet Vanessa Cole alone. A simple telephone chain was created for emergencies. These precautions transformed isolated fear into shared responsibility. Vanessa could still threaten one person, but doing so now alerted several others. Community did not remove danger. It changed the mathematics of intimidation by ensuring that harm would create more testimony rather than more silence. Ifeoma Nwosu discovered the personal truth at the center of the story. Ifeoma confesses that she knows Dayo is wealthy, but plans to leave him because his lies have made love feel like an examination. The revelation did not provide easy joy. It exposed how deception, pride, and fear had damaged the very relationship everyone claimed to protect. The central truth reached Ifeoma Nwosu through evidence that could not be negotiated away. Ifeoma confesses that she knows Dayo is wealthy, but plans to leave him because his lies have made love feel like an examination. The revelation was not joyful at first. It rearranged memories and exposed how many conversations had rested on false assumptions. Ifeoma sat alone after everyone left, understanding that the truth had arrived early enough to change the future, but far too late to protect the past. Ifeoma Nwosu wanted to telephone Dayo Akinwale immediately, but stopped. Delivering the truth without preparation could become another act of control. An independent person was asked to explain the evidence and its limits. This restraint did not repair earlier deception, but it showed learning. For once, Ifeoma allowed the person most affected to choose when, where, and in whose presence life-changing information would be received. An independent test or review was scheduled. Dayo Akinwale chose the location and requested written consent procedures. Ifeoma Nwosu accepted every condition without argument. That cooperation could not undo what had happened, but it provided the first evidence that regret might be changing behavior. Waiting for results proved difficult. Ordinary tasks continued, while both characters carried the knowledge that one envelope could rearrange family, love, responsibility, or identity. When Dayo Akinwale learned the truth, relief arrived beside anger. The facts answered old questions while creating painful new ones. Dayo refused to let anyone use blood, romance, gratitude, or money as a shortcut around accountability. Dayo Akinwale received the news without giving the reaction others expected. Relief, grief, and anger arrived together. Questions followed. Who knew? Who benefited? Why was silence called protection long after danger passed? Dayo made one boundary clear. The newly discovered connection would not become permission for anyone to rewrite the life already lived or erase the people who had offered love without status. Dayo Akinwale asked to be alone after hearing the secret. Outside, Mama Uche guarded the door against curious relatives. Grief came first, not only for what had happened, but for the version of life that could no longer be believed. When Dayo finally emerged, the face was calm. "The truth belongs to me," Dayo said. "Nobody will use it as a chain, even if they call the chain love." Mama Uche reminded Dayo Akinwale that new truth did not invalidate old love. People who had raised, taught, or protected Dayo remained family, regardless of what a voice recording revealed. This reassurance mattered because discovery can feel like betrayal of the life already lived. Dayo began to understand identity as a house with more than one room, not a narrow doorway through which only one name or relationship could pass. Vanessa Cole denied everything and attacked the credibility of the weakest witnesses. Expensive lawyers and respected friends repeated the denial, yet small details kept agreeing with one another, and the polished story began breaking at its edges. Vanessa Cole responded by attacking the witnesses. Poverty became jealousy, memory became confusion, and every missing document was blamed on clerical error. The language sounded impressive until dates were placed beside it. Each denial required another denial to survive. Even loyal supporters began avoiding Vanessa's eyes, recognizing that they were being asked to defend a story that changed whenever evidence appeared. Vanessa Cole made one serious mistake during the denial, describing a detail that had never been publicly disclosed. A lawyer paused. A witness looked up. Dayo Akinwale asked how Vanessa knew it. The answer wandered through several explanations and satisfied none. From that point, the room stopped treating Vanessa as the person entitled to judge everyone else and began listening as though the polished voice might itself be evidence. Vanessa Cole called a respected elder and asked for public support. The elder agreed before seeing the evidence, loyal to history and status. During the meeting, however, one answer from Vanessa contradicted the version given on the phone. The elder's confidence faltered. Reputation had secured an ally quickly, but inconsistency turned that ally into a witness capable of describing how the false story had been recruited and distributed. A final attempt was made to destroy a voice recording. The effort failed because somebody once considered insignificant had preserved a copy. That simple act of foresight carried more power than the threats designed to erase it. Someone attempted to destroy a voice recording before dawn. The effort came close to succeeding, but the earlier copy survived, with a person Vanessa Cole had ignored. When Dayo Akinwale saw the damaged original, anger briefly overwhelmed caution. Mama Uche insisted they proceed lawfully. "The truth has carried us this far," Uche said. "Do not let them make your anger the only thing people remember." The surviving copy of a voice recording was not perfect. Part was blurred, damaged, or incomplete. Yet it matched independent records closely enough to establish authenticity. Vanessa Cole attacked the imperfection, hoping people would confuse incomplete evidence with false evidence. The expert explained the difference patiently. Truth did not need to arrive in beautiful condition. It needed a reliable chain, showing where it came from and who had tried to destroy it. Protecting the surviving copy required an ordinary person to resist a frightening request. Vanessa Cole offered money first, then implied consequences. The custodian replied that the file had already been shared with independent authorities, though this was only partly true at the time. The bluff bought enough hours to make it completely true. Courage arrived not as fearlessness, but as one believable sentence, spoken while hands trembled out of sight. The confrontation took place before people whose silence had enabled the harm. Dayo Akinwale spoke without exaggeration. presenting facts in their proper order. The calmness made every interruption from Vanessa Cole appear smaller and more desperate. The final meeting drew relatives, workers, officials, or community elders who had previously chosen silence. Dayo Akinwale did not begin with accusations. The evidence was presented in order, allowing each fact to support the next. Vanessa Cole interrupted twice and was asked to wait. For once, money could not control the pace of the room. The quiet attention of ordinary witnesses became its own form of authority. Mama Uche sat behind Dayo Akinwale during the hearing, close enough to be seen but not to take over. Whenever emotion threatened concentration, Dayo touched the edge of the chair and continued. The presentation avoided insults. Names, dates, and actions were enough. That restraint protected the story from becoming a contest of personalities and forced everyone present to consider conduct rather than social rank. Before the hearing, Dayo Akinwale practiced the account aloud with Mama Uche. Emotional words were not removed, but facts were separated from conclusions. Say what happened, Uche advised. Let them discover what it means. This preparation protected Dayo when hostile questions attempted to provoke anger. Each calm answer returned attention to the evidence and made the aggressive questioning reveal more about the questioner than the witness. Then the decisive revelation arrived. Dayo learned that the confession he feared was actually Ifeoma, choosing dignity over his fortune. Faces changed as the old hierarchy of credibility collapsed. Those who had mocked, dismissed, or accused Dayo Akinwale suddenly searched for language that would distance them from their own conduct. Then the decisive fact was confirmed. Dayo learned that the confession he feared was actually Ifeoma choosing dignity over his fortune. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The people who had mocked Dayo Akinwale searched one another's faces, hoping responsibility might be shared until it disappeared. It did not. Their earlier words remained part of the record. Dayo stood without triumph, aware that being proven right could not return everything the deception had taken. The revelation altered the meaning of earlier scenes. A rejected offer became proof of integrity. A missing record became evidence of concealment. An old warning finally made sense. Ifeoma Nwosu looked at Dayo Akinwale with relief and shame. Relief came from finding the truth. Shame came from knowing that Dayo had carried its consequences without the protection that knowledge and wealth could have provided. After the revelation, someone who had participated in the mockery offered sudden friendship. Dayo Akinwale declined politely. Respect inspired by newly discovered status was not the same as repentance. A genuine apology would have named the earlier conduct without emphasizing the new connection to money or power. This distinction became essential. The truth had changed what others knew about Dayo, but it had not changed Dayo's worth. Ifeoma Nwosu confessed the failures that money and status had hidden. The apology named specific harm and offered no demand for immediate forgiveness. Dayo Akinwale listened, but refused to perform reconciliation for the comfort of an audience. Ifeoma Nwosu apologized without an audience arranged for sympathy. Specific failures were named, along with the harm they caused. Dayo Akinwale refused the easy ending others wanted. I can believe you are sorry, Dayo said, and still need time before I believe you are safe. Ifeoma accepted the distinction. That acceptance became the first apology expressed through behavior rather than language. Dayo Akinwale did not promise forgiveness. Instead, 3 conditions were stated. No more secret tests, no public announcement without consent, and no private settlement that abandoned other victims. Ifeoma Nwosu wrote them down. I should not need to be reminded, Ifeoma said. Dayo answered, then let your actions make the reminder unnecessary. The exchange established a future based on observable commitments rather than emotional declarations. Ifeoma Nwosu began repairing harm before asking about the relationship. Wages, records, medical bills, or damaged property were addressed because they were owed, not because restitution might earn affection. Dayo Akinwale noticed the order. It did not create instant trust, but it prevented the apology from becoming another transaction in which decent behavior was performed only to purchase access to someone's heart. Legal, professional, and family consequences followed. Vanessa Cole discovered that influence could delay evidence, but not permanently replace it. People who had obeyed harmful instructions were required to explain the choices they once called just doing my job. Consequences arrived through interviews, suspended authority, frozen accounts, or family decisions. They were less dramatic than revenge and more difficult to escape. Vanessa Cole discovered that influence could delay a question, but could not permanently silence everyone who knew the answer. People who had carried out cruel instructions also had to explain why keeping a position had once seemed more important than protecting another person. Some consequences were public, others painfully private. Invitations stopped arriving. Trusted titles disappeared from office doors. Relatives asked questions they had avoided for years. Vanessa Cole called the response betrayal. Mama Uche called it the bill for choices repeatedly charged to other people. The difference mattered. Consequence was not cruelty imposed from outside. It was responsibility finally returning to the person who had exported it. Vanessa Cole asked for mercy while describing every consequence as excessive. Dayo Akinwale refused to decide the legal process personally. I will not use influence to destroy you, Dayo said, and I will not use influence to protect you. The response removed revenge from the story without removing accountability. Mercy could shape how truth was told. It could not require vulnerable people to live beneath the same unchecked power again. Dayo Akinwale was offered a private reward. Instead, the demand was widened to protect others who would face the same injustice without cameras or influential witnesses. The request transformed one rescue into structural change. A private reward was offered to Dayo Akinwale as if one check could close the matter. Dayo asked instead for rules that would protect the next vulnerable worker, tenant, patient, child, or relative. The request surprised those accustomed to gratitude being personal and quiet. By widening the remedy, Dayo turned an exceptional rescue into a change that could survive after public interest faded. The reform demanded by Dayo Akinwale included independent oversight, written complaint procedures, and consequences that applied to relatives and senior staff. People accustomed to informal favors complained about bureaucracy. Dayo replied that clear rules were protection for those without private access. The new system would never guarantee goodness, but it would make cruelty harder to hide behind a respected surname or a closed office door. The reform meeting included people usually invited only to serve refreshments or clean afterward. Their experience changed the proposals. A rule that looked fair on paper created hidden hardship for workers paid daily. A complaint channel assumed access many residents did not possess. Listening slowed the launch, but improved it. Dayo Akinwale insisted that those most affected should help design the system meant to protect them. Months passed. Dayo publicly admits the test was wrong, earns forgiveness slowly, and funds a transparent training studio that Ifeoma controls independently. Progress appeared through ordinary routines rather than a single celebration. Trust returned in portions, tied to transparent action. Months later, the new arrangement was visible in ordinary routines. The promised outcome slowly became real. Dayo publicly admits the test was wrong, earns forgiveness slowly, and funds a transparent training studio that Ifeoma controls independently. There were still disagreements and days when trust felt fragile. Progress came through records kept properly, promises fulfilled without cameras, and doors opened by fair policy rather than private favor. The absence of a perfect ending made the improvement feel more honest. The change could be described in concrete terms. Dio publicly admits the test was wrong, earns forgiveness slowly, and funds a transparent training studio that Ifeoma controls independently. The first public celebration was deliberately modest. Dayo Akinwale thanked the people who had helped before the outcome became fashionable. Ifeoma Nwosu remained away from the microphone unless invited. That choice signaled a deeper change. The powerful person was no longer the automatic center of a story made possible by somebody else's courage. On the first difficult day after Dio publicly admits the test was wrong, earns forgiveness slowly, and funds a transparent training studio that Ifeoma controls independently, old habits returned. A senior person tried to bypass the new rules and invoked a famous name. Dayo Akinwale refused the request publicly but respectfully. This small enforcement mattered more than the opening ceremony. Institutions reveal their truth when standards inconvenience insiders, not when leaders announce principles before cameras and friendly guests. Mama Uche remained part of the new chapter, refusing to let success erase the neighborhood, workers or relatives who had carried the truth when it was unpopular. Shared meals became more meaningful than formal speeches. Mama Uche remained close enough to challenge any attempt to make success glamorous. At a shared meal, Uche teased Dayo Akinwale about new responsibilities and reminded everyone who had washed plates, borrowed transport fare, or kept copies beneath a mattress. Laughter restored proportion. The story belonged not only to the powerful people who finally changed, but to the ordinary people who had carried truth while it was dangerous. During the meal, Mama Uche produced the old plastic folder and joked that it deserved a chair of its own. The laughter carried relief without denying what had happened. Younger people listened as witnesses retold the story, correcting one another whenever memory became too flattering. By preserving awkward details alongside heroic ones, they protected the lesson from turning into a legend that ordinary people could admire but never imagine living. Mama Uche kept one visible reminder of the earlier struggle: a repaired chair, faded apron, scratched tool or copy of the first evidence. Visitors sometimes suggested replacing it with something impressive. Uche refused. The object prevented success from polishing the past into a comfortable story. It honored the days when the outcome was uncertain and kindness came from people who had no guarantee of standing near victory. The weeks after the confrontation were quieter than the days leading to it. Public attention moved elsewhere, leaving Dayo Akinwale to handle forms, repairs, and difficult conversations. This was where change became real. Ifeoma Nwosu kept appointments without sending assistants, and Mama Uche checked every promise against written action. Nobody mistook improvement for completion, but the absence of secret arrangements allowed ordinary trust to breathe again. One former critic came to Dayo Akinwale with an apology that contained no mention of the newly revealed status or connection. The person named the exact words used and admitted enjoying the humiliation because the crowd had made cruelty feel safe. Dayo appreciated the honesty without offering immediate closeness. Some relationships could be repaired. Others were useful, mainly as lessons about the company people keep when mockery becomes fashionable. Dayo Akinwale visited someone else harmed by the same system and listened without turning the conversation toward personal victory. Their losses were different, and not everyone had received public proof or restitution. The meeting prevented success from becoming self-congratulation. Justice for one visible person was meaningful, but it remained incomplete, while quieter victims still lacked records, advocates, or a respected name willing to repeat their account. At home, Dayo Akinwale opened the old notebook and read the earliest entries. The handwriting had been unsteady then. Beside several fears now sat dates, showing what had actually happened. Mama Uche suggested throwing it away, then understood why Dayo declined. Keeping the notebook was not living inside pain. It was honoring the frightened person who had documented truth before knowing whether anyone would ever believe it. Ifeoma Nwosu faced a private question that no public apology could answer. Why had control once felt safer than honesty? The explanation included family history, shame and fear of being used, but none excused the choice. Counseling, spiritual guidance, or the discipline of accountable friendships began addressing that deeper pattern. Without such work, regret might merely produce a kinder-looking version of the same manipulation. Vanessa Cole remained responsible for the harm even after the story stopped following every consequence. This mattered because dramatic endings often suggest that one exposure instantly changes a person. Real accountability was slower. It required returning what had been taken, answering lawful questions, and living without the authority once used carelessly. Whether remorse eventually grew could not be forced by Dayo Akinwale or guaranteed by punishment. The community adopted one modest practice from the experience. Important complaints would no longer depend on a single person's memory or access. Copies were kept, meetings documented, and vulnerable witnesses accompanied. These habits lacked the excitement of a convoy or revelation, yet they made future abuse harder. Wisdom became visible in preparation, not in waiting for another unusually brave person to rescue everyone alone. A celebration finally took place without hiding the difficult history. Mama Uche served food, children moved between chairs, and older guests argued cheerfully about details. When someone called Dayo Akinwale lucky, the room grew thoughtful. Luck had played a part, but the outcome also rested on costly choices made before reward was imaginable. Calling everything luck risked erasing the courage, patience, and community labor that truth had required. Before the last journey, Dayo Akinwale stood alone for a moment and allowed gratitude to exist beside grief. Something precious had been restored, while other things remained beyond repair. Both facts could be true. The future did not need a false claim of perfect healing. It needed enough honesty to prevent old wounds from governing every new decision, and enough hope to make responsible love worth attempting again. Dayo Akinwale and Ifeoma Nwosu revisited the place where their lives first crossed. Nothing about the street looked miraculous, yet both understood that one inconvenient act of decency had interrupted years of deception. Dayo Akinwale and Ifeoma Nwosu returned to the place where their lives first crossed. The road, office, market, or courtyard looked smaller than memory. They spoke about what could be rebuilt and what must simply be mourned. No promise was made quickly. When they finally walked away together, it was not because every wound had healed, but because neither was pretending the wound had never existed. At the place of their first encounter, Ifeoma Nwosu asked whether Dayo Akinwale regretted stopping to help. The answer came slowly. "I regret what people did with my kindness," Dayo said. "I do not regret being kind." That distinction captured the journey. Wisdom had not required becoming suspicious of everyone. It had required joining compassion with boundaries, evidence, and the courage to leave when affection demanded self-betrayal. Dayo Akinwale and Ifeoma Nwosu discussed the future in practical terms: boundaries, work, family access, and what information could be shared publicly. Romance or reconciliation, where possible, was allowed to grow behind those agreements rather than substitute for them. Mature affection appeared less dramatic than the original secret, but it was stronger because neither person needed confusion to create intensity. The story ended without pretending every wound had vanished. It left a harder and more useful lesson. Love cannot survive where one person is always the examiner and the other is always the suspect. In a society quick to bow before appearances, the truest wealth remained the courage to recognize another person's humanity before learning their name. The closing image remained with Dayo Akinwale, not with money, punishment, or public applause. One inconvenient act of decency had exposed a hidden system and changed several lives. The lesson was simple without being easy. Love cannot survive where one person is always the examiner and the other is always the suspect. People often discover character too late because they wait to learn someone's importance before deciding whether that person deserves dignity. The final lesson did not claim that kindness always produces wealth or public justice. Often, it does not. Its value was deeper. Love cannot survive where one person is always the examiner and the other is always the suspect. Dayo Akinwale had been worthy before anyone discovered the secret, and the vulnerable people in the story remained worthy even when no powerful relative arrived. The moral asked viewers to recognize dignity early, before an inheritance, camera or convoy made recognition socially convenient. As evening settled over Lagos Island, Surulere and Victoria Island, ordinary life continued. Food simmered, children argued, buses filled, and tired workers searched for transport home. The world had not become perfectly just. One circle of people had simply chosen to stop cooperating with a particular injustice. That limited victory was still meaningful. Lasting change often begins when a few ordinary witnesses decide that the familiar wrong will no longer be treated as normal.